The auction hall reeked of sweat, metal, and desperation. Dim, flickering lights illuminated the rows of prospective buyers, merchants, mercenaries, and slavers, each appraising the specimens paraded before them like livestock. At the center of the raised stage stood her, bound in heavy iron chains, her body marred by weeks of captivity. Her name was Lyra, and though her sapphire skin shone faintly in the weak light, her eyes burned with defiance, a fire not yet extinguished by her captors. The crowd murmured, debating her worth. To them, she was an exotic alien, a rare Tauric, prized not only for her physical strength, but also for her rumored resistance to harsh planetary conditions. To Lyra, they were vultures, circling a feast they had no right to claim. The auctioneer, a bloated figure with a voice as slimy as his demeanor, raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold, a pure-blood Tauric, strong, unyielding, and fiercely independent. She'll serve you well in the mines, as a guard or even as a trophy to show off your wealth." His grin stretched unnaturally as he gestured toward Lyra, as if her defiance only made her more valuable. In the shadows of the hall, Jace leaned against a rusting metal pillar, his face hidden beneath the hood of his battered jacket. A human traitor by appearance, he was something far more dangerous when provoked. His gaze was locked on Lyra, not with the predatory greed of the others, but with something closer to resolve. He had seen enough suffering in his travels, and this was not something he could walk away from. The bids began low, escalating quickly. Jace kept quiet, waiting for the moment when most had exhausted their funds or their interest. When the final bid echoed -7,500 credits, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. 15,000. The room went silent. Even the auctioneer faltered, blinking rapidly as if unsure he had heard correctly. 15,000. He repeated, his voice rising with disbelief. Jace nodded once, pulling a small, unassuming device from his pocket. Transferred immediately. The crowd erupted into whispers, the disbelief palpable. Who was this human to spend such an exorbitant sum on one slave? The auctioneer, however, was quick to recover. Greed overtook suspicion, and with a flourish, he announced, "Sold." Jace strode toward the stage, his movements unhurried but purposeful. He climbed the steps and approached Lyra, who met his gaze with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. The chains clinked as he knelt to unlock them, his hand steady despite the weight of the room's stairs. "You think this buys my loyalty, human?" she hissed, her voice low but laced with venom. Jace smirked faintly as the final chain fell away. "No, but it gets you out of here alive." Lyra hesitated, then stepped forward, rubbing her wrists. The crowd's eyes bore into them as Jace guided her off the stage. Behind them, the auctioneer began to tally his profits, oblivious to the murmurs of discontent brewing among the bidders who had lost. As they disappeared into the maze of alleys beyond the auction hall, Lyra finally broke the tense silence. "Why?" Jace glanced at her. "Because someone needed to." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her pride warring with her gratitude. Before she could respond, a distant shout echoed down the alleyway. The slavers weren't done with them yet. "Looks like they're not keen on letting you go," Jace muttered, pulling a sleek blaster from his holster. Lyra smirked for the first time since her capture, her sapphire eyes glinting with anticipation. "Good. Let them try." The sound of boots pounding on the metal street grew louder as the first of their pursuers appeared. Lyra and Jace exchanged a glance, unspoken understanding passing between them. Together, they prepared to face what came next. The metallic clang of approaching boots echoed louder, resonating through the narrow alley like a war drum. Lyra flexed her fingers, her muscles tightening with readiness despite the weeks of captivity. Her eyes scanned the shadows, pinpointing movement before the first slaver emerged, a hulking brute wielding a serrated baton. Jace's blaster hummed to life in his hand. With a flick of his wrist, he motioned for Lyra to stay back, but she stepped forward instead, her defiance as sharp as ever. "I've been in chains long enough," she said, her voice low but seething with intent. "Let me remind them who I am." The slaver lunged, his baton swinging in a wide arc. Lyra moved with precision, sidestepping and delivering a bone-crushing blow to his ribs. The crack of impact echoed, and the brute crumpled, his baton clattering to the ground. Jace raised an eyebrow. Not bad for someone who was just freed. Lyra snatched up the baton, twirling it experimentally. "You haven't seen anything yet." A second slaver charge, this one firing a stun pistol. The bolt sizzled past Lyra's shoulder, narrowly missing her. Jace dropped to one knee, firing a quick succession of shots that struck the attacker square in the chest. The man crumpled without a sound. "Watch your back." Lyra snapped, darting toward him. She swung her newly claimed baton, deflecting a blaster shot aimed at Jace's side. The sheer force of her retaliation sent the weapon flying from the attacker's hand. Jace shot her a quick grin. "You're full of surprises." "Try to keep up, human," she retorted, stepping in front of him to face two more slavers rounding the corner. The duo hesitated, clearly re-evaluating their chances against the sapphire-skinned alien and the human with the sharp aim. Lyra didn't give them the luxury of thought. She launched herself at them, her movements fluid and unrelenting. The baton struck one across the jaw, then jabbed into the other's solar plexus, leaving both gasping on the ground. Jace fired at a final figure retreating down the alley, his shot barely missing as the slaver vanished into the shadows. He turned to Lyra, who stood panting, her baton still raised. "That should buy us a little time," he said, lowering his weapon. Lyra scanned the area, her gaze still sharp. "They'll send more." "They always do." Jace nodded, stepping closer. "Then we move. Quickly." For a moment, they stood in tense silence, both catching their breath. Lyra eyed him, her expression softening just slightly. "You're not like the others." "Neither are you," he replied evenly, his eyes meeting hers. "Which is why we're going to make it out of this." Lyra's lips curved faintly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She gave a single nod, and together they started down the alley, disappearing into the labyrinth of shadows. The distant hum of engines stirred the air. Overhead, searchlights began sweeping the area, the slavers escalating their hunt. Lyra tilted her head, her acute hearing picking up the whir of a drone. "They're tracking us," she said. Jace cursed under his breath. He glanced at her, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a compact device. "Here," he said, tossing it to her. Lyra caught it, frowning. "What's this?" "EMP charge," Jace explained, already scanning the rooftops for the source of the noise. "Small range, but it'll fry any electronics nearby. Use it when I give the signal." She studied him for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Understood." The whirring grew louder. Jace motioned for her to stay low as he climbed a nearby stack of crates, positioning himself on a ledge overlooking the alley. A sleek surveillance drone hovered into view, its crimson light blinking as it scanned the ground below. "Now," Jace shouted. Lyra activated the device, tossing it high into the air. The EMP detonated in a pulse of blue light, the drone sputtering before plummeting to the ground in a lifeless heap. Jace jumped down, landing beside her. "That'll slow them down. But we're not out of this yet." Lyra nodded, her grip tightening on the baton. "Then let's keep moving." As they disappeared deeper into the maze of alleys, neither spoke, their focus on survival. Yet unspoken, a fragile alliance had begun to form, a bond forged not in trust, but in necessity. For Lyra, the fire of her defiance burned brighter. And for Jace, the resolve that had brought him here hardened into something more, a determination to see this through, no matter the cost. The alleys twisted and turned like a labyrinth, their dim lighting casting long, flickering shadows that distorted reality. Jace led the way, his movements practiced and precise, while Lyra stayed close behind, her baton ready. Every creak of metal or distant echo set them both on edge. Do you even have a plan, or are we just wandering aimlessly? Lyra asked, her voice low but pointed. Jace smirked without looking back. You'd be surprised how far aimless wandering can get you when you know where not to go. That doesn't sound like much of a plan. Trust me. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Trust wasn't something she gave freely. But then again, she wasn't dead yet, a feat she reluctantly credited to the human. For now, she decided to follow, though her mind was already cataloging escape routes should his vague promises lead them into a trap. They reached a narrow gap between two decrepit buildings, and Jace paused, gesturing for silence. Lyra strained her hearing, catching faint voices and the metallic clatter of approaching boots. She pressed her back against the cold wall, her breath steadying as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Blockade, Jace whispered, peering around the corner. 3 slavers, 2 armed with blasters, 1 with a shock baton. They're guarding the only path out of here. Lyra shifted beside him, gripping her own baton tighter. We can take them. Jace raised an eyebrow. Direct approach doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, she shot back. He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. Fine. If you're that eager to fight, let's make it count. I'll create a distraction. You take out the blasters. Lyra's lips quirked into a faint grin. Finally, something straightforward. Jace didn't reply, instead slipping a small flashbang from his belt. He pulled the pin and tossed it around the corner, covering his ears as the device exploded in a burst of light and sound. The slavers shouted in confusion, their movements frantic as they tried to recover. Lyra was already in motion. She sprinted into the fray, her baton sweeping upward to disarm the first blaster-wielding slaver. The weapon clattered to the ground as she delivered a spinning kick to his chest, sending him sprawling. The second slaver fired blindly, the shot missing her by inches. Lyra closed the distance, striking his wrist with precision and forcing him to drop the weapon before driving her baton into his gut. Jace emerged from the shadows, firing a clean shot that hit the third slaver's shock baton, shorting it out. The man growled and lunged at him, but Jace sidestepped, delivering a sharp elbow to the side of his head. The slaver crumpled to the ground, unconscious. See, straightforward, Lyra said, standing over the downed slavers. Jace gave her a wry look. You're lucky they weren't smarter. And you're lucky I'm good at this. He couldn't argue with that. Together, they scavenged what they could, spare energy packs for Jace's blaster, a few ration bars, and a tattered map of the area. Jace studied it briefly, nodding as he folded it into his pocket. There's a transport hub a few blocks from here, he said. If we're fast, we can grab a shuttle before they lock down the sector. Lyra hesitated. And where exactly is this shuttle taking us? Jace's expression darkened slightly. Anywhere but here. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was better than the change she'd left behind. They moved quickly, their pace relentless as the faint hum of patrol drones filled the air again. The slavers weren't giving up. Their net was closing. Lyra's heart pounded, but she pushed aside her fear, focusing instead on the sharp clarity of survival. When they reached the transport hub, the sight was both a relief and a challenge. Several shuttles rested on rusted docking pads, their engines idle. Guards patrolled the perimeter, more organized and better armed than the ones they had faced so far. Looks like we'll have to pick our battles, Jace muttered. Lyra scanned the area, her mind racing. What about that one? She pointed to a smaller shuttle near the far edge of the lot, its ramp half lowered. Fewer guards. Jace followed her gaze, nodding. Looks promising. Let's keep this quiet. They moved in tandem, skirting the edges of the hub and slipping into the shadows whenever patrols passed. Lyra's movements were swift and silent, a predator stalking her prey. Jace kept his blaster ready, his sharp eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. As they reached the shuttle, Lyra froze, her hand shooting out to stop Jace. 2 guards stood near the entrance, chatting idly but alert. She motioned for Jace to wait as she crept closer, her baton poised. Before Jace could protest, she struck. The first guard went down with a single blow to the back of the neck, the second barely managing to turn before she disarmed him and rendered him unconscious with a swift strike to the temple. Jace joined her, shaking his head in disbelief. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." Liara smirked. "You're already on thin ice." They boarded the shuttle, sealing the ramp behind them. Jace quickly accessed the cockpit, his fingers flying over the controls as the engines hummed to life. Liara took a seat, her grip on the baton finally relaxing as the shuttle lifted off, the slaver-infested planet shrinking below them. For the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. But she knew better than to let her guard down. Freedom had a price, and she wasn't sure how high she'd have to pay. As the stars filled the viewport, she glanced at Jace. "You've done this before, haven't you?" He didn't look at her, his focus on navigating the shuttle. "Rescue people. Occasionally." "Why?" This time, he met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because someone has to." Liara studied him for a long moment, then leaned back in her seat. For now, that answer would suffice. The shuttle cut through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming steadily. Liara remained in her seat, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't surrounded by walls, chains, or the stench of slavers. Yet the freedom felt fragile, like a bubble waiting to burst. In the cockpit, Jace was busy inputting coordinates into the nav system, his brow furrowed in concentration. Liara's sharp eyes didn't miss the tension in his posture. She stood and moved toward him, her steps light despite the small confines of the shuttle. "Where are we going?" she asked, her tone as sharp as ever. "Out of slaver space," Jace replied without looking up. "There's a trade station on the edge of neutral territory. We can refuel, regroup, and figure out what's next." Liara crossed her arms. "What's next for you, maybe. I don't plan on sticking around long enough to find out." Jace glanced at her, his face calm but his eyes serious. "You think they won't keep looking for you? Slavers don't take losses lightly. They'll have your name, your face, and probably a bounty before we're even halfway to the station." Her jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong, but the idea of relying on a human, one she barely knew, grated on her. "I didn't ask for your help. And yet, here you are," Jace said, turning back to the console. "You can either keep fighting me, or we can figure out how to survive this together." Liara stared at him, frustration flaring in her chest. But deep down, she knew he was right. She wasn't just another runaway. She was a prize, a rare Tauric, and the slavers wouldn't stop until they reclaimed her or killed her to set an example. A sharp beep from the console broke the silence. Jace frowned and tapped a few buttons. "That's not good." Liara leaned over his shoulder, her keen eyes scanning the screen. "What is it?" Scanner picked up an approaching ship. "No ID tag. Running dark," Jace said. "Could be a patrol, or worse, pirates. Or slavers," Liara added grimly. Jace nodded. "They're closing in fast. Too fast for us to outrun in this bucket." Her eyes narrowed. "So what's the plan?" "Plan?" Jace said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "I thought you liked straightforward." Liara rolled her eyes. "Not when it involves dying in a shootout." "Then we'll have to get creative," Jace said, standing and moving to the back of the shuttle. He rummaged through a storage compartment, pulling out a small spherical device. "What's that?" Liara asked, watching him with suspicion. "EMP grenade. Short range, but enough to knock out their systems if we get close. And ours too," she pointed out. Jace shrugged. "Better than getting boarded. Once they're disabled, we'll drift until they lose interest." Liara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Risky." "Welcome to freedom," Jace replied, already moving toward the airlock. "I'll need you in the cockpit. When I give the signal, hit the maneuvering thrusters. We'll need to get close enough for this to work." She hesitated, the weight of trust settling heavily between them. Then, with a sharp nod, she turned and returned to the controls. Her hands hovered over the console, ready for his signal. "Here we go." Jace's voice crackled over the comms. "Brace yourself." The shuttle's thrusters roared to life, jerking them toward the incoming ship. Lyara's heart pounded as the enemy vessel loomed closer, its sleek, predatory shape unmistakably that of the slaver craft. They'd been found. Jace's voice came again, calm but urgent. "Now." Lyara slammed the thruster controls, sending the shuttle into a sharp arc that brought them within spitting distance of the slaver ship. Through the viewport, she could see their pursuers scrambling to react. A faint click echoed through the comms as Jace activated the grenade. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a pulse of energy rippled outward, washing over both ships in an instant. The lights flickered, and every system on the shuttle went dead. Lyara felt the weightless drift of a ship losing power. In the distance, the slaver craft had gone dark too, its engines silent. "Jace," she called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Still here," came his reply, followed by the faint sound of footsteps as he returned to the cockpit. "Nice flying." Lyara raised an eyebrow. "That was your idea, not mine." "Team effort," Jace said, dropping into the co-pilot's seat. "Now we wait and hope they decide we're not worth the effort." "And if they don't?" Jace leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Then we improvise." The silence stretched between them as they drifted in the cold void. Lyara's mind raced with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. But for now, all they could do was wait. The silence of the deadened systems filled the cockpit, broken only by the occasional creak of the hull as the shuttle floated through the void. Lyara kept her eyes on the slaver craft, its darkened silhouette looming like a predator playing dead. The uncertainty gnawed at her, a stillness that could shatter into chaos at any moment. Jace, however, was calm, his movements deliberate as he adjusted the straps of his seat and reached for a backup power pack. "This'll take a while to bring our systems back online," he said, his voice steady. "ENUP fried the secondary circuits too." "How long?" Lyara asked, her gaze flicking between him and the lifeless slaver ship. "Best guess, 10, maybe 15 minutes. But they'll be out longer if their systems are more complex." "And if they're not?" Jace shrugged. "Then we hope their weapons need a reboot." Lyara's lips pressed into a thin line. The tension was a physical thing in the air, an unspoken countdown ticking away in her mind. "You put a lot of faith and hope, human." "It's gotten me this far," he replied with a faint smirk. She scoffed, but there was a flicker of amusement in her sapphire eyes. "You're insane." "Maybe," Jace said, fiddling with the backup power unit. "But you're alive, aren't you?" Before she could respond, a faint flicker of light appeared on the slaver ship. Lyara tensed, her sharp eyes catching the unmistakable glow of emergency systems coming back online. "They're faster than you thought," she said, her voice low. Jace cursed under his breath, his calm facade cracking. "Looks like they've got better redundancies. Time for Plan B." "Plan B?" she asked, her skepticism palpable. "Let me guess. More improvising." He glanced at her, his expression hardening. "You wanted to fight, didn't you?" Lyara's gaze narrowed. "Always." Jace tossed her a small blaster from his belt, its weight solid in her hands. "We're sitting ducks out here. If they board us, we make sure they regret it." Lyara's grip tightened on the weapon, the familiar sensation grounding her in the moment. "Fine. But if we survive this, you're fixing that shuttle of yours properly." "Deal," Jace said, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. The slaver ship's lights grew brighter, and with a sudden jolt, its engines flared to life. The predator was awake. "They're closing in," Lyara said, her voice sharp as she watched the craft turn toward them. "Get ready," Jace replied, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat and activating manual controls. The shuttle systems were still dark, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. The slaver ship loomed closer, its sleek frame bristling with visible weaponry. Lyra could see figures moving behind its viewport, their intent clear. She clenched her teeth, a mix of anger and determination coursing through her. "Whatever you're planning," she said, "it better be good." Jace's fingers hovered over a small recessed panel in the console. He pulled it open, revealing a switch beneath a layer of dust. "You ever heard of an old Earth trick called Dead Man's Switch?" Liara frowned. "Enlighten me." "It's a failsafe," Jace explained. "If they try to board us, I'll trigger a localized overload in the reactor. Big enough to fry them, small enough to keep us in one piece, if we're lucky." Her eyes widened, then narrowed as she studied him. "You're insane." "Maybe," Jace said again, his smirk returning. "But I'd rather go down fighting than end up on their leash." The slaver ship was almost upon them now, its docking clamps extending like claws. Lyra stood, bracing herself near the hatch, her blaster ready. Her heart pounded, but her focus was razor-sharp. The comms crackled to life, a guttural voice echoing through the cabin. "Shuttle, this is Captain Droth of the Iron Fang. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Resist, and we will destroy you." Jace leaned toward the console, his voice calm as he replied. "Captain Droth, this is just a simple trader shuttle. You sure you want to waste your time with us?" A low growl came through the comms. "You've got something that belongs to me. No more games." "They're not backing off," Lyra said, her tone grim. "Didn't think they would," Jace muttered. His hand hovered over the switch, his eyes locked on the viewport as the slaver ship aligned with their docking hatch. The sound of metal clamps engaging sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. "This is it," Jace said. "Stay sharp." The hatch hissed, and the first slaver stepped through, his weapon raised. Lyra didn't wait for him to aim. She fired first, the blaster's shot echoing in the confined space. The slaver dropped, but more followed, their guttural shouts filling the shuttle. Jace grabbed a makeshift weapon, a heavy metal rod, and joined the fight, his movements swift and precise. Lyra fought beside him, their unlikely partnership forged in the heat of battle. For every slaver they took down, two more seemed to take their place. The cramped quarters worked to their advantage, but the numbers were against them. "Jace," Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't hold them all." "I know," he yelled back, his hand darting toward the switch. Before he could press it, a sudden explosion rocked the shuttle, throwing them both to the floor. Alarms blared, and the slaver ship's lights flickered wildly. "What the hell was that?" Lyra shouted, scrambling to her feet. Jace stared at the viewport, a mixture of relief and confusion on his face. "Looks like someone else doesn't like slavers either." Outside, another ship had appeared, a sleek, heavily armed craft firing on the slaver vessel with deadly precision. Lyra's breath caught as she recognized the insignia on its hull. "Tauric resistance fighters," she murmured. Jace grinned, his voice tinged with admiration. "Guess you've got friends after all." The tide had turned, but the fight wasn't over yet. The slaver ship reeled under the precision strikes of the Tauric resistance vessel, its hull erupting in gouts of flame and debris. The Iron Fang's weapons stuttered to life, returning fire with desperate ferocity, but it was clear who had the upper hand. Lyra's sapphire eyes were riveted to the battle outside, her blaster still gripped tightly in her hand. Jace pulled himself upright, his face a mixture of relief and urgency. "Resistance fighters or not, we're still in the crossfire. We need to move." "Our systems are still down," Lyra reminded him, but her gaze lingered on the resistance ship. "Unless your miracle backup plan includes a second shuttle." "No backup shuttle," Jace replied, already working to restore the main power. "But if they're Tauric, maybe they're here for you. We just need to signal them." "Signal them how? With finger guns?" she snapped, then immediately regretted the tone. Her anger wasn't directed at him, but at the situation, at the slavers, at the universe. Jace shrugged, grinning faintly. I was thinking more along the lines of this. He tapped a button on the auxiliary comms console, activating a low-frequency emergency beacon. The display lit up weakly, a small victory amidst their current predicament. Outside, the battle raged on. The slaver ship was listing now, its return fire sporadic and unfocused. The resistance craft's sleek form darted around it like a wolf circling its prey, its weapons unrelenting. Liara leaned closer to the viewport, her chest tightening. They won't risk letting slavers escape. If we don't move, we'll be collateral damage. Jace didn't look up from the console, his hands flying over the controls. Then let's give them a reason to pick us up before that happens. The emergency beacon crackled to life, broadcasting a simple message in Galactic Standard. Civilian shuttle requesting assistance. Onboard passengers require immediate evacuation. Repeat, civilian shuttle requesting assistance. The response was almost immediate. A clipped, authoritative voice answered over the comms. Civilian shuttle. Identify yourself. Liara grabbed the comms mic, her voice steady and clear. This is Liara of the Tauric, held captive by slavers. We require extraction. There was a brief silence. Then the voice returned, tinged with shock. Liara, by the stars, is it truly you? Her grip on the mic tightened. It is. And unless you want my remains floating in space, you'd better move quickly. Jace chuckled under his breath. Nice touch. Quiet, human, she muttered, though a flicker of gratitude passed through her expression. The resistance ship broke off its attack, pivoting sharply to focus on the shuttle. The burst of rapid communication followed, and soon, the Tauric ship's tractor beam locked onto their craft. The shuttle jolted as it was pulled toward the larger vessel's docking bay. Jace let out a long breath, his posture relaxing slightly. Looks like we're getting out of this in one piece. For now, Liara replied, her gaze hard as she watched the slaver ship retreat into the darkness, smoke trailing from its battered hull. But they'll be back. Slavers don't forgive, and they don't forget. Neither do we, Jace said, his tone firm. And we're not running anymore. The shuttle clanged against the docking bay floor of the Tauric resistance ship. A hiss of pressurized air followed as the outer hatch opened, revealing a squad of Tauric warriors clad in sleek combat armor. Their leader, a tall figure with sharp, angular features, stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Lara. It's really you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We thought you were lost. I nearly was, Liara replied, stepping off the shuttle with a grace that belied her exhaustion. But thanks to him, she gestured toward Jace. I'm here. The warrior's gaze shifted to Jace, his expression unreadable. A human. Jace raised a hand in a casual salute. Name's Jace. Nice to meet you too. The warrior frowned but nodded. If Liara vouches for you, that is enough. It should be, Liara said sharply, her tone brooking no argument. He saved my life more than once. I wouldn't be standing here without him. The warrior inclined his head. Understood. Come, we have much to discuss. As they moved deeper into the ship, Jace couldn't help but notice the deference the crew showed Liara. Whispers followed them, murmurs of Liara the Unbroken and the last Tauric warrior. He leaned closer to her, his curiosity getting the better of him. Didn't realize you were famous, he said quietly. I'm not, she replied, her voice low. Not in the way you think. To them, I'm a symbol, proof that even in the darkest times, our people endure. And to you? Jace asked. Liara hesitated, her sapphire eyes flickering with something unreadable. To me, it's just another chain. The weight of her words settled over him, but before he could respond, they reached a large chamber filled with holographic displays and tactical maps. The resistance leader gestured for them to sit. Liara, we need your help, he began, his tone grave. The slavers have grown bolder, their reach expanding. We've been fighting a losing battle. She nodded, her expression hardening. Then it's time to turn the tide. Jace crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. You've got the firepower. What's stopping you? The leader glanced at him, then back at Lyra. Numbers, resources, but most importantly, strategy. We've been reacting to their moves, not anticipating them. Lyra's gaze flicked to Jace. And that's where you come in, human. You've seen their tactics firsthand. Can you help us? Jace smirked, his eyes glinting with determination. Oh, I can do more than help. Let's make them regret the day they crossed paths with us. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself a small smile. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like they had a fighting chance. The resistance ship hummed with subdued energy as Lyra, Jace, and the Tauric warriors gathered in the war room. Tactical maps floated in the air, holographic displays detailing known slaver operations, trade routes, and strongholds. Jace leaned over one of the displays, tracing a route with his finger, while Lyra stood beside him, arms crossed and eyes sharp. This, Jace said, tapping on a glowing red marker, is their main hub. Supplies, reinforcements, and most of their profits flow through here. If we hit this, they'll be scrambling. The Tauric leader, who had introduced himself as Kale, frowned. That's Korath Station. Heavily fortified, crawling with slavers, mercenaries, and automated defenses. Attacking it would be suicide. Not if we're smart about it, Jace countered, straightening up. We don't need to destroy the whole station. Just cripple it, take out their communications, disable their supply chains, and sow enough chaos to make them turn on each other. Lyra nodded thoughtfully. Divide and conquer. If we destabilize their leadership, the smaller factions will fight for control. It could work. Kale glanced between them, his skepticism evident. Even if we manage to infiltrate the station, how do you propose we escape? They'll hunt us relentlessly. Jace's lips curled into a sly grin. Let's just say I have a knack for making dramatic exits. Lyra rolled her eyes but smirked faintly. That's one way to put it. Kale hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. But this plan requires precision, coordination, and absolute trust. One misstep, and we're all dead. Trust me, Jace said, his tone firm. I've gotten out of worse. The mission preparation was grueling. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency accounted for. The Tauric resistance fighters equipped Jace and Lyra with advanced gear, stealth suits, energy-dampening boots, and compact but powerful weaponry. Lyra adjusted her wrist-mounted blade, the familiar weight grounding her amidst the tension. Jace tested a small cylindrical device that emitted a faint hum. What's this? He asked one of the technicians. EMP disruptor, the technician explained. Short range, but it'll knock out most electronics for a few minutes. Use it wisely. Jace grinned. I like it already. Lyra observed him from across the room, her expression unreadable. Despite their rocky start, she couldn't deny that Jace's confidence and ingenuity were infectious. He had a way of turning impossible odds into manageable challenges, a trait she was beginning to admire. Ready? She asked as he approached, fully suited up. Always, he replied, his grin widening. You? Lyra's expression softened just for a moment. I've been ready for this fight my whole life. The infiltration began under the cover of a dense asteroid field. The resistance ship used the debris to mask its approach, slipping past the station's outer sensors. Jace, Lyra, and a small team of Tauric fighters boarded a stealth pod, their faces grim as the pod detached and drifted toward Korath Station. Inside the cramped pod, the silence was oppressive. Jace leaned back, breaking the tension with a casual remark. So, Lyra, what's the plan if this all goes south? She arched an eyebrow. Don't let it. He chuckled. Fair enough. The pod docked with the station's maintenance port, its magnetic clamps locking into place. Jace took point, his movements deliberate as he hacked the airlock controls. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. "Stay close," Lyra murmured to the team, her voice barely audible over the hum of the station's systems. The group moved like shadows, avoiding patrols and security cameras. Jace consulted his wrist-mounted holomap, guiding them toward the station's main power grid. Along the way, they passed holding cells filled with alien prisoners, beings of all shapes and sizes, their eyes hollow with despair. Lyra paused, her jaw tightening. "We have to free them." "Not yet," Jace whispered. "We'll do more harm than good if we alert the whole station now. Stick to the plan." Reluctantly, she nodded, her heart aching with the weight of her people's suffering. They reached the power grid without incident. Jace crouched beside the central control panel, pulling out the EMP disruptor. "This'll buy us some time," he said, setting the device in place. "Once it goes off, we'll have about 3 minutes before they reboot their systems." "And then?" Kale asked, his voice tense. Jace smirked. "Then we improvise." The EMP disruptor activated with a low hum, and the station's lights flickered before plunging into darkness. Alarms blared as backup generators struggled to restore power. Lyra and the team sprang into action, disabling security measures and planting charges at key points. The chaos spread quickly. Slavers scrambled to regain control, their disorganization playing into the Resistance's hands. As the charges detonated, Korath Station shook violently, its once imposing structure now a battlefield. Jace and Lyra led the prisoners toward the docking bays, fighting off slavers at every turn. The Tauric fighters held the line, their determination unyielding despite the odds. As they neared the extraction point, Lyra glanced at Jace, her voice firm. "Go, get them out of here." "What about you?" he demanded. "I'll cover the rear," she replied, her expression resolute. "This is my fight." Jace hesitated, then nodded. "Don't take too long." She smirked faintly. "I won't." The last of the prisoners boarded the escape pods, their faces filled with cautious hope. Jace turned back toward the station, his heart pounding as he waited for Lyra. When she finally appeared, bloody but victorious, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Cutting it a little close, don't you think?" he said as they boarded the final pod. Lyra grinned, her sapphire eyes blazing with triumph. "I told you. I've been ready for this fight my whole life." As the pod launched, the station erupted in a fiery explosion behind them. The slavers' empire had taken a devastating blow, and for the first time in years, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope for her people. Beside her, Jace leaned back, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "So, what's next?" Lyra's gaze turned toward the stars, her determination unwavering. "We rebuild, and we make sure they never hurt anyone again." Jace nodded, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "I'm in." Together, they faced the unknown, united by their shared defiance and an unbreakable resolve to fight for freedom. The Resistance celebrated their victory aboard their flagship, a salvaged war cruiser retrofitted into a mobile base. Cheers echoed through the mess hall as fighters toasted their triumph over the slaver stronghold. Lyra stood at the edge of the room, her sapphire skin catching the soft light, her expression distant. The fight had been won, but the war was far from over. Jace approached, carrying 2 cups of the Resistance's version of celebratory rations, a thick, bitter drink that burned going down, but bolstered spirits nonetheless. "You're the hero of the hour," he said, handing her a cup. "Why so glum?" Lyra accepted the drink, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Because this is only the beginning. Korath Station was a victory, but there are more like it, more captives, more suffering." Jace took a sip, wincing at the taste. "You're right, but you gave them hope, Lyra. That's no small thing." She turned to face him, her eyes softening. "And you gave me hope, Jace. Without you, none of this would have been possible." "Don't give me too much credit," he said, though his tone was lighter. "You were the one leading the charge." The moment lingered, unspoken gratitude passing between them. Before either could say more, Cale joined them, his expression grim. "We've intercepted a transmission." Liara stiffened. "From the slavers." Cale nodded, gesturing for them to follow. They made their way to the bridge, where a holographic display showed the intercepted message. A towering alien figure loomed in the projection, its voice cold and mechanical. "To the resistance forces who dare oppose us, your insolence will not go unpunished. Surrender now, and we may show mercy. Resist, and we will crush you and your pathetic allies." Jace crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "They don't waste time, do they?" "They're rallying," Cale said, his voice low. "The attack on Korath Station has shaken them, but it's also united the remaining factions. They're mobilizing for war." Liara's expression hardened. "Then we hit them first. We can't let them regroup." Cale hesitated. "We don't have the resources for a full-scale assault. Our forces are stretched thin." Jace stepped forward, his mind racing. "Then we don't fight them head-on. We hit their supply chains, disrupt their alliances, and force them to spread themselves thin. Make them fight on our terms." Liara nodded, her resolve firm. "Agreed. We've already proven they're not invincible. Now we show them what true resistance looks like." Cale glanced between them, then sighed. "Very well, but we'll need a plan, and quickly." Over the next few days, the resistance worked tirelessly to prepare for their next moves. Scouts gathered intelligence on slaver movements, while engineers upgraded the fleet's weapons and defenses. Jace and Liara became an inseparable team, their strategies complementing each other's strengths. In quieter moments, they found themselves talking about their pasts, their dreams, and the scars that had shaped them. Jace shared stories of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, and Liara listened with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Your people," she said one evening as they sat in the ship's observation deck, "you've faced so much, yet you keep fighting. Why?" Jace gazed out at the stars, his expression thoughtful. "Because giving up isn't in our nature. We fight because we believe things can be better. Because we have to." Liara studied him, her heart swelling with a mix of respect and something deeper. "I see that in you, Jace. That unyielding spirit. It's inspiring." He turned to her, his eyes warm. "I could say the same about you." The connection between them was undeniable, but neither dared to act on it. Not yet. There was too much at stake, too much unfinished. But in that moment, they found solace in each other's presence. The first strike of their renewed campaign came swiftly and decisively. Using intel from intercepted communications, the resistance ambushed a slaver convoy transporting weapons and resources. Liara led the charge, her blades a blur as she cut through enemy lines, while Jace provided covering fire with uncanny precision. The victory was a turning point. News of the resistance's success spread like wildfire, inspiring others to rise against their oppressors. Small rebellions ignited across the galaxy, each one a spark in the growing inferno of defiance. But the slavers were not idle. Their leaders convened in secret, plotting their retaliation. As the resistance gained momentum, so too did the dangers they faced. Late one night, Liara found Jace in the ship's armory, tinkering with a blaster rifle. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. He glanced up, offering a wry smile. "Not with everything we got riding on this." She stepped closer, her expression serious. "Jace, if we fail." "We won't," he interrupted, his tone firm. "We can't afford to." Liara hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given me so much to believe in, but I don't want to lose you." Jace set the rifle down, his gaze meeting hers. "You won't. I promise." The weight of their unspoken feelings hung in the air, but before either could say more, the ship's alarms blared. They exchanged a glance, their resolve hardening. The fight was far from over. Together, they raced toward the bridge, ready to face whatever came next. For the resistance, for freedom, and for each other. The ship's alarms blared as the resistance fleet mobilized. Lyra and Jace arrived on the bridge, where Kale stood at the central console, barking orders to the crew. A holographic display projected the incoming threat, a massive slaver dreadnought escorted by a swarm of smaller ships. "They're hitting back hard," Kale said grimly. "This isn't just retaliation. They're trying to wipe us out." Lyra scanned the projection, her sharp mind calculating. "We need to split their forces. If we take out their escorts, the dreadnought will be vulnerable." Jace nodded, stepping beside her. "And if we hit the dreadnought's engine core, we can force them into retreat or destroy them entirely." Kale hesitated. "That's a long shot. Their defenses are overwhelming." "Long shots are what we're good at," Lyra said, her voice firm. "Prepare the fleet. We fight." Kale gave a curt nod, relaying her orders. The resistance ships moved into formation, their mismatched vessels a testament to their patchwork rebellion. But their resolve was unwavering. This was their moment to stand or fall. As the battle erupted, the resistance fought with a ferocity born of desperation and determination. Lyra led a strike team in a nimble assault ship, weaving through the chaos as they targeted the slaver escorts. Jace stayed aboard the flagship, coordinating tactics and providing fire support. "Keep pressure on their flanks," Jace commanded, his voice steady despite the tension. "Don't let them regroup." Lyra's ship darted through enemy lines, her blades carving through enemy fighters in a deadly dance. "Jace, we're clearing the path. The dreadnought's exposed." "Understood," bringing the flagship in for a strike. The Resistance's flagship surged forward, its cannons unleashing a devastating barrage. The dreadnought's shields flared, absorbing the onslaught, but cracks began to show. Lyra's team took advantage, targeting critical systems with pinpoint precision. But the slavers weren't finished. Their remaining forces regrouped, launching a counterattack that threatened to overwhelm the resistance. Explosions rocked the fleet as ships fell under the relentless assault. "We're losing too many," Kale shouted over the chaos. "We can't hold this position." Lyra's voice cut through the comms. "Focus on the mission. We take that dreadnought down, or we die trying." Jace's gaze hardened as he made a decision. "Lyra, I'm coming to you." "Kale, you have command." "Jace, what are you?" Kale began, but Jace was already gone. Jace boarded a small fighter and raced through the battlefield, dodging enemy fire as he made his way to Lyra's ship. He docked amid the chaos, stepping into the cramped cabin to find her at the helm. "You couldn't let me have all the fun," she said, glancing at him with a faint smirk. "Thought you could use some backup," he replied, strapping into the co-pilot's seat. "What's the plan?" She pointed to the dreadnought looming ahead. "We're going straight for the engine core. If we hit it, the explosion will take out the entire ship. And us with it," Jace noted. Lyra's smirk widened. "Not if we're fast enough." The two of them worked in perfect sync, maneuvering the ship through the dreadnought's defenses. They dodged turret fire and enemy fighters, their focus unshakable. Lyra's skill as a pilot was matched only by Jace's precision with the ship's weapons. Finally, they reached the engine core. The massive structure pulsed with energy, protected by layers of armor and automated defenses. "Jace, we've got one shot at this," Lyra said, lining up the ship for an attack run. "I'm ready," he replied, his hand steady on the controls. As they approached, the dreadnought's defenses intensified. Explosions rocked their ship, but they pressed on. Lyra fired the main cannon, striking a critical point in the core's armor. The explosion created a breach, exposing the volatile energy within. "Now," Lyra shouted. Jace launched a payload of torpedoes into the breach. The engine core erupted in a blinding flash, the shockwave tearing through the dreadnought. Alarms blared as the massive ship began to disintegrate. "Time to go," Lyra said, pulling the ship into a desperate retreat. They sped away as the dreadnought exploded in a cataclysmic burst of light and debris. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, scattering the remaining slaver forces. Cheers erupted over the comms as the resistance realized what had happened. The dreadnought was gone, and with it, the slavers' ability to mount a coordinated attack. Back aboard the flagship, the mood was jubilant. The resistance had won a decisive victory, and the tide of the war had turned. Lyra and Jace stood on the observation deck, watching the stars. "We did it," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. Jace nodded, his expression thoughtful. "This is just the beginning. The slavers are on the run, but there's still work to do." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Jace, thank you for everything." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of their journey hanging between them. Then, slowly, Lyra leaned closer, her lips brushing against his in a tentative, heartfelt kiss. Jace responded, his hand gently resting on her cheek. When they pulled apart, Lyra smiled. "Looks like you're stuck with me." Jace chuckled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Together, they faced the stars, ready to rebuild a galaxy free from oppression. For the resistance, for freedom, and for each other.